Well, good morning.
Good morning, Hata Sensei.
Happy Hanamatsuri. Let's see. Good morning, Penny, joining us on Facebook. And good morning to Morgan, who's our, I was going to say, when I saw her this morning at around 5 to 10, she was the only one here, and so I thought, she's our substitute Sangha today. I am the substitute minister and the substitute streamer, but I guess we're joined by some others, so I'm glad to have all of you here. Thank you very much for coming. And, of course, really want to thank Lisa Shimamoto and her crew for the wonderful flowers that she did.
Yes.
It really puts us in the Hanamatsuri spirit, and I also want to thank the Otani Gakuen Choir for their wonderful gatha, both gathas, but I think especially Flower Groves, that obviously is very relevant to the Hanamino, and I hope to our the idea of what the Hanamatsuri really represents today. So thank you to the Otani Gakuen Choir. For my talk today, I wanted to address this question of why we celebrate the Buddha's birth at Hanamatsuri. So of course, on the one hand, the beautiful flowers and the sweet tea that we pour over the baby Buddha symbolize the appreciation that we have for the Buddha's birth and for his teachings. These teachings remind us of the preciousness of all life. And I think, obviously, Buddhists around the world celebrate his birth every year. But on the other hand, I can't help but also reflect on the contrast between this positive, life-affirming Hanamatsuri spirit and the reality that more than ever there seems to be a great need for the Buddha's teachings. And what I'm referring to is our increasingly, I would say, divided world. I don't think I need to go into any specifics. I'm sure we're all too aware of this every day in the news. But let's just say there seems to be a rise in what we might refer to as negativity. But this isn't just an everyday, seeing the glass as half empty rather than half full kind of negativity. Increasingly, unfortunately, this is a negativity that manifests in anger and hate. And I really feel bad for all of us, but maybe particularly for our young people. They have their lives ahead of them. And unfortunately, in today's world, we are often witness to an ever-increasing negativity. However, in the Buddha's teachings, I believe there is an antidote for this negativity. And so what I'd like to discuss today is how Buddhism addresses this phenomenon of anger and hate, what we could call a climate of extreme negativity. But first, as I've done in a past talk, I think it's important to distinguish between this word negativity and a similar sounding word. This word is negation. So Buddhism, of course, discourages negativity, and especially negative emotions like anger and hate. I think we all know that anger is one of the three poisons. The three poisons are the root of all human suffering. But then our Buddhist teachers often talk about the necessity of what we might term negation. So what is negation? Negation, or more specifically in Buddhism, the negation of one's self-attachment, is the essence of the insight that the Buddha received in his enlightenment. So as we know, I think, many of you have heard many times the story of the Buddha's life, right? And we know that before his enlightenment, the Buddha was known as Prince Siddhartha. He probably would have eventually become a king like his father, except that as he grew into a young man, as his world expanded, he became more and more aware of the lives of others around him. And this likely included his family, his friends, and the people in his community. And he began to question why people suffer so much when they inevitably experience aging, illness, and death. These are encounters with the powerful truth that Buddhism refers to as impermanence. This is the reality that everything, including all life, is constantly flowing and changing. But here, I think it's very notable that upon encountering these difficulties himself, Siddhartha did not, in extreme negativity, lash out in anger at everyone around him and blame others for his difficulties. This is something I think that we see all too often today. Instead, he seriously and thoroughly examined the way that his own mind was contributing to his difficulties. So in deep inward meditation, he realized that the real cause of his suffering was not due to impermanence itself, but rather to his not understanding its full scope. Examining his own mind, he realized our human tendency is to think or hope that this self of ours somehow exists outside the constant flow of impermanence. Somehow it's safe. But the Buddha saw that this is a mistake. It's a mistake because it's out of sync with the way things really are. The way things really are, according to the Buddha, is that this so-called self of ours is not separate from, but is, along with all other selves, simply part of this constant flow of impermanence. When he realized his mistake, his illusion of having a separate self, then along with any sense of self-pity or self-righteousness, this was all negated. And in the negation of the self-attachment, he spontaneously attained enlightenment, liberation from self-attachment. So Buddhism is a teaching that emphasizes inward self-examination, not outward anger and hatred. At this point, I'm going to ask you to please bear with me because I'd also like to share the ideas of another wise teacher. I don't think the Buddha would mind. Some of you might, but I don't think the Buddha would. But I shared these words once before in a previous talk, and given that the focus of my talk today is, I guess we could say, the cause and cure of negativity, I think these words bear repeating. And by the way, I thought of this other teacher because his words happened to come from a film franchise that just happened to make a big announcement a few days ago. So after a 4-year hiatus, 3 new, highly anticipated big screen films are on their way. And so if you heard the news, you know that I'm referring to Star Wars, right? And in an earlier Star Wars film, there's a memorable quote of this wise teacher that also addresses the problem of negativity, anger, and hate. And probably many of you have heard this quote before. So this is a pop quiz. I'm gonna ask you to raise your hand and also let me know in the comments if you've heard this quote before and what movie it comes from. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. So raise your hand if you know who said that and what movie it's from. I'm going to give the Facebook people a little extra time because unless Penny, you don't know. Penny's the only one online right now. Only one. Oh no, there's a few people, but maybe. Okay, did you raise your hand? Okay, go ahead. Let's see, in the back.
Alan.
Okay,
Yoda?
and
Yoda?
in the movie?
Is it The Empire Strikes Back?
Close, but no cigar. It's actually from The Phantom Menace, which, as a millennial, you should know that film. See, baby boomers like me, we only know the original trilogy, but then you know, George Lucas came up with a prequel trilogy that actually was a prequel to the original trilogy. That came out, I think, in the late 90s. And then, of course, the most recent trilogy was a sequel trilogy. But anyway, it was Master Yoda in the Phantom Menace. And actually, this theme of the suffering caused by anger and hate appears throughout all 9 of the main Star Wars films, and I think maybe especially in the most recent film, 2019's The Rise of Skywalker. And so those of you who are Star Wars fans know that if you let your anger and hate get the better of you, you're said to have turned to the dark side. And actually, this may sound like a paradox or some kind of Zen koan, but according to our Buddhist teachers, the way to avoid turning to the dark side is actually to examine the dark side within. Isn't this exactly what the Buddha did 2,500 years ago? So here I'd like to share with you some really great comments from some great comments on Jedi Master Yoda from Reverend Mas Kodani, who's the former minister of Senshini Buddhist Temple. So Reverend Kodani was, naturally impressed with Yoda's wisdom in yet another Star Wars film, which was Anna, The Emperor Strikes Back. He was specifically referring to what's known as the cave scene. This is the scene where Jedi Master Yoda instructs his student Luke Skywalker to enter a dark, foreboding cave. So in this scene, Luke is in training to become a Jedi with Master Yoda, but he senses that something's not right. His teacher, Master Yoda, tells him it's because of the dark, foreboding cave nearby. That place, a domain of evil it is, and you must go. Luke says, "What's in there?" And Yoda replies, "Only what you take with you." First, Luke cautiously enters the cave, but as he goes deeper and deeper into the cave, he suddenly stops as he sees something terrifying. It's the Dark Lord himself, the evil Darth Vader, and the two engage in a lightsaber battle. Luke manages to strike a blow to Vader and apparently beheads him. But as the helmeted head stops rolling, it suddenly explodes, revealing none other than the face of Luke himself. As we later learned in the climactic ending of Empire Strikes Back, and spoiler alert if you haven't seen this movie, close your ears. As we later learned, this shocking scene in the cave is foretelling that Luke will soon discover that Darth Vader is actually his father. Okay, you can uncover your ears now. So his teacher, the Jedi Master Yoda, knew that in order for Luke to become a true Jedi, he first needed to acknowledge the darkness within himself. Without confronting the darkness within, one cannot become a Jedi. And remember that when Luke had asked Yoda, "What's in the evil cave?" Yoda had cryptically replied, "Only what you take with you." What Luke had taken with him was the darkness and negativity within himself, which was symbolized by Luke's face inside Darth Vader's helmet. I think this, of course, resonates with the story of Shakyamuni Buddha's own enlightenment. It was when the Buddha fully and completely recognized the darkness within himself, his self-attachment, that his self-attachment was then negated and he attained enlightenment. He became the Buddha. And so in commenting on this scene, Reverend Kodani had said, if you don't look at the dark side, you can never be enlightened. The Buddha is trying to get us to see what's really happening in our minds. But, he clarified, the Buddha is not asking you to look at the good side. Look at the dark side, because it's the dark side that frees you. I think Reverend Moss's comments on the cave scene explain why we are witnessing so much negativity today. Because rather than honestly examining ourselves and seeing the darkness within ourselves and taking responsibility for it, it's much more enjoyable for our ego to point out what we're sure is the darkness in others, right? But this is exactly why we need to encounter a teaching and truth much greater than us, much greater than our self-attachment. And I think this is why we honor and actually celebrate the Buddha's birth every Hanamatsuri. It's because the Buddha's teachings are the only true cure for negativity. Well, I think there's finally one other reason why we celebrate the Buddha's birth at Hanamatsuri. So after his enlightenment, the Buddha, with a infinitely positive and life-affirming spirit, worked tirelessly and compassionately to guide countless others to enlightenment. So therefore, rather than outwardly projecting negative feelings of anger and hate toward others, the only true outward focus in Buddhism is to join together with others and to work to share the wisdom of the Buddha's teachings with others. That's my talk for today. Thank you very much for listening. Namo Buddhaya.